So today I want to talk about asexuality. More specifically, I wish to discuss language, labels, categories of reality, and how asexuality fits into the category of human. To begin this topic, we have to first outline some theory on language and representation. Stuart, a respected linguist, proposes that two main systems of representation exist. The first is a system whereby components of reality are correlated with mental representations formed in our brains. Hall explains that mental representations can correlate with perceivable objects in reality, such as a spoon or a playing card, or they can correlate with more abstract concepts. Such examples include rights, relationships, and goals which, although they do not physically exist, can be mentally represented. These mental processes consist, as Hall writes, not of individual concepts, but of different ways of organizing, clustering, arranging, and classifying concepts, and of establishing complex relations between them. Moreover, without these mental processes, we could not interpret the world meaningfully at all. For more information on this, I suggest reading Ferdinand de Sauzer's text, Course in General Linguistics. The second system of representation Hall mentions is language. Language is a complex system of representation composed of signs which stand for or represent the concepts and the conceptual relations between them which we carry around in our heads. Although language typically brings to mind a representational system which uses words as signs, Hall insists that language can also use visual images, colors, facial gestures, and other signs which aren't linguistic in any ordinary sense. Hence, language can employ signs which bear resemblance to the thing it is representing, as is the case with realism paintings, or it can forego resemblance, as one finds with written language, where letters, words, and whole texts represent sounds and states of affairs without in the least bit resembling what they represent. An analysis of the everyday lives of human beings easily demonstrates how important language is in the creation of a shared reality. Common languages that are used among a community of speakers allow for individuals to communicate their mental representations to each other. However, language is also important due to its ability to shape human thinking. Through the categories created by language, one's perception and interpretation of reality is influenced. When applied to humans, the representational systems of language have the potential to alter self-identity and perceptions of others. One of the ways this can be demonstrated is with the rather contentious topic, race. Bill Ashcroft contends that it is possible that the idea of race exists entirely in language. Tracing the history of the creation of racial categories, Ashcroft claims that in 1794, Immanuel Kant was the first to use the term race in the sense of a biologically or physically distinctive categories of human beings. Through language, race becomes more than skin pigmentation and comes to denote a category and identity which one inhabits that is deeply mired in historical and sociological factors. For this reason, Ashcroft concludes that the paradox of race is that the reality of racial experience centers not in physical typology or community of blood or genetic variation, but in language. The role of language in this process becomes apparent when one investigates how connotations associated with certain linguistic signifiers shape the categories of race. According to Ashcroft, black came to evoke evil very early in European history and was allied to the concepts of sin, treachery, ugliness, filth, and degradation, night and morning, while white came to be associated with cleanliness, purity, beauty, virginity, and peace. These connotations continue to affect how racial categories are perceived. This is not to say that language is the only cause of racial hierarchies, but rather that how the hierarchy is conceived of is reliant on associations from previous usages of signifiers. Another highly important category created by language is that of the human, which is also sometimes signified by the archaic term man. According to scientific taxonomy, the label human is applied to the Homo sapiens species, which is typically characterized by the bipedal locomotion, large craniums, and 23 pairs of chromosomes that its members have. Thus, the label comes to represent individuals who possess certain key attributes. The universalizing terms used to describe humans illuminate the attributes often tagged to this representation. Homo symbolicum, for example, is a term used by some philosophers to describe humans as creatures whose distinctive character is the creation and manipulation of signs. Similarly, animal rationabile, apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, is used by philosophers such as Kant to describe humans as animals capable of reason. Thus, to enter the category of human, it is not enough to merely possess a certain number of chromosomes. Furthermore, for one to label oneself as human, one must believe oneself to possess key characteristics, lest one knowingly mislabel oneself. So why bring this up? And what does it have to do with asexuality? One of the most important characteristics of humanhood is sexuality. Humans are considered to be creatures with innate sexual desires. As Kristin Scherrer writes, one of the most pervasive social assumptions is that all humans possess sexual desires. This is typically referred to as the sexual assumption. The sexual assumption manifests in various fields of knowledge, such as psychology and medicine, where sexuality is seen as a natural, healthy, and essential aspect of the human, and the possibility of an asexual human has been recognized only relatively recently, and then solely in pathologizing terms. Even psychoanalysts such as Sigmund Freud assume a sexual basis to basically the entire range of human psychology. Thus, not unexpectedly, research by Cara, MacInnis et al. Revealed that sexual desire is considered a key component of human nature, and those lacking it are viewed as relatively deficient, less human, and disliked. Hence, in a questionnaire distributed among undergraduate students, asexuals were attributed significantly lower uniquely human traits than any other sexual orientation group. Hence, we find that the asexual label is, in some ways, incompatible with the human label. So, how do we find a solution to this problem and rehumanize asexuality? I feel as though the solution to this is making use of the plasticity of language in order to reshape it to better describe the reality that asexuals experience. You see, asexuals are human, perfectly human, and it is through continuously speaking of asexuals in humanizing terms that the sexual assumption can be thwarted. Scherrer lists mutability as one of the characteristics of language. Expanding on this, he claims that due to the arbitrary relationship between the signified and the signifier, any symbol could be used to represent any idea. The arbitrariness of the signifier allows language to become an institution which constantly changes over time in response to the forces which affect it. This has been the case for the label queer, which has been reappropriated in much of Western culture and has consequently shed much of its injurious past, causing Judith Butler to argue that this demonstrates that a word can be cited against its originary purposes and perform a reversal of effects. We've seen this occur with several labels that have been used in the past to dehumanize people. The N-word is probably the greatest example of this remolding of language, as within African American culture, it has been turned from a dehumanizing label to one which can be used as a term of endearment. So, what can we do about the asexual label to make it more humanizing? Well, the best way is to talk about it. Write about it. Let people know that the sexual assumption is false and that asexual human beings exist all among us. The human label may not currently make space for an asexual identity. However, the wonderful thing about the label human is that it implies a thinking being, one who is capable of reflecting on beliefs and changing one's mind.